All right. I want to welcome everyone to PAFA's lunch hour online conversation. Super excited to have Maggie Adler, the curator of painting, sculpture, and works on paper from the Amon Museum of Art, and Letitia Huckaby, an incredible artist working from Houston, works in multimedia, photography, archives, and so we'll be learning more about that today. I want to thank our funders. The Art at Noon lectures are supported by the Leftko family in memory of a beloved member of the docent corps, Mildred T. Leftko. I also just want to say how excited we are to connect this conversation into not just the exhibition that just closed, Making American Artists, which featured the Friedman sculpture, PAFA's piece in our collection, but also the Rising Sun, Artists in an Uncertain America, which is the current exhibition at PAFA, and I put the link in the chat. 20 contemporary artists, all responding to the prompt: is the sun rising or setting on the experiment of American democracy? And I just want, I want to say that I feel like the work you're doing, Maggie, Letitia, and all of the artists in that show connect to the conversation here at PAFA in so many ways, and of course our countrywide. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about our Juneteenth plans later on in the show, right, Maggie? So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Anna Marley, our PAFA's Chief of Curatorial Affairs, and welcome everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lori. And something Lori always says, which she didn't say this time, but she always says, is that our exhibition at PAFA, Rising Sun, is a partnership with the African American Museum in Philadelphia. So there are 9 artists at the African American Museum in Philadelphia, and there are 11 artists at PAFA. So please come see the show. Many of the themes that I think Maggie and Letitia are going to explore in their talks today are relevant to our current exhibition. So I'm going to introduce my old friend Maggie and my new friend, hopefully Letitia, and then we'll get started with the talk. So Maggie Adler is curator of painting, sculpture, and works on paper at the Amon Museum of Art, which I always think of as kind of a sister institution to PAFA, since it's a great American art museum in Fort Worth, Texas. Adler's scholarly research focuses on 19th century art, but consistent with the Carter's commitment to foster cross-temporal connections, she has collaborated with living artists like Gabriel Daw, Mark Dion, Justin Favela, and she's always off on interesting adventures with contemporary artists. I love following her adventures. Following a 2019 gallery remodel, Adler played a critical role in the museum's collection reinstallation that reconceived how visitors interact with the collection. Since joining the Carter in 2013, Adler has organized numerous exhibitions, including Horizon Lines, In Our Own Words, Native Impressions, Myth Makers, The Art of Winslow Homer and Frederick Remington, Sandy Rodriguez, and the current exhibition that she will be talking about today, the Emancipation, the Unfinished Project of Liberation. Prior to coming to the Carter, Maggie was in Philadelphia as the Barra Fellow at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, as well as many other amazing contributions, including working on a show I really loved, Wild Spaces, Open Seasons, Hunting and Fishing in American Art. And she has a Bachelor of Arts in Classical Languages and History of Art, Master of Arts from History of Art from Williams College. Letitia Huckaby has a degree in journalism from the University of Oklahoma, a BFA in photography from the Art Institute of Boston, and a master's degree from the University of North Texas in Denton. Huckaby has exhibited as an artist at the Phillips, New York, the Tyler Museum of Art, the Studio Museum of Harlem, the Renaissance Fine Art in Harlem, curated by Deborah Willis, PhD. And Deb Willis is included in the Rising Sun exhibition at AMP. So that's a great connection between photography, journalism, and Letitia's work. Her work is included in several prestigious collections, including the Library of Congress, the Great McNay Art Museum, the Art Museum of Southeast Texas, the Brandywine Workshop in Philadelphia, woo, Brandywine, the Sable Elyse Contemporary Art Center at Scripps College in Claremont, California. Huckaby was a featured artist in MAP 2020, The Further We Roll, The More We Gain at the Amon Carter, and State of the Art 2020 at Crystal Bridges. Ms. Huckaby was a fall 2020 Art Pace Artist in Residence and is represented by the Tally Dunn Gallery in Dallas. Ms. Huckaby is the co-founder of Kinfolk House, a collaborative project space that inhabits a 100-year-old historic home where community and art converge in the predominantly Black Latinx neighborhood of Polytechnic in Fort Worth, Texas. And she is Texas Artist of the Year for 2022. So we are so honored and thrilled that Maggie and Letitia are here with us today, and we cannot wait to hear about your project. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. And I see Carol Soltis. We shared half a desk with each other when I was at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So I feel like I'm actually almost there with you right now. So it's good to see you. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this is, if we're successful. Okay, that's step one. That's good. And I'm just delighted to be here today with all of you. Can you see the PowerPoint? Thumbs up.
Yeah, but we got your presenter view, so
Okay.
we did yesterday.
How about now?
Yeah.
Good? Okay, cool. So yeah, so I'm delighted to be here today with all of you. I wish I could be there and be eating chocolate chip cookies from Reading Terminal Market, but we'll have to save that for another time. And I'm even more delighted to introduce all of you to the work of Letitia Huckaby, whose art is just tremendous and I've followed for years. The project for MAP stands for Making Art with a Purpose. It's a social justice organization, art to facilitate social change, and Letitia made a flag for us celebrating prominent women. So that was the first time we worked together, and really thrilled that we could work together on Emancipation. I will say that this project was originally conceived in partnership with Horace Ballard, my buddy from the Williams College Museum of Art before he moved on to Harvard. Extraordinary thought partner, and ultimately finalized with Marita Poole, who is the the director of Newcomb's Art Gallery at Tulane University, where the show will be traveling next. So Marita sends her best, and she's telling us to break a leg, figuratively, not literally. So the exhibition, now that is out of the way, the exhibition was really started based on this work in the Carter's collection, and this should look familiar to those of you who have visited PAFA. I'm hearing PAFA, so I think maybe I have to switch my pronunciation. So this is John Quincy Adams Ward's The Freedman from 1863, just on the cusp of, it was conceived of while the ink was still wet on Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, and coincided with the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation. The Carter's version is, and here is the plaster that John Quincy Adams Ward used to promote the work and to facilitate people ordering it in bronze. So that is traveling with Anna's wonderful show. But so the Carter's version differs from the other 7 known versions in some pretty significant ways, and that is that the shackle is operable. So here you see a key that came with the sculpture, and the shackle open. And the shackle also bears an inscription to the Massachusetts 54th, the all-Black regiment from that fought the historic battle, among others, at Fort Wagner. And so that's always posed a kind of conundrum to me as the custodian of this work for the Carter. why? Why is there a connection with the Massachusetts 54th? Why is there a key? How do I feel about the fact that there's a key? Is this a performative action where a white robber baron would unlock and relock the shackles? So this kind of always posed a question, but it's also always felt to us as curators at the Amon Carter like a very aspirational sculpture for 19th century, in that this person has broken the bonds of enslavement by his own power. And that differs from most representations of emancipation you will see in sculpture. This is probably the second bronze of African-American figure in the United States. And Ward very clearly intended this nuance of someone set free by his own power, the power to break the chains of bondage. We were coming on our 60th anniversary at the Amon Carter, and I had a conversation with Alfred Walker, who was, he's just retired, but he was our head of facilities. He started as an 18-year-old janitor at the Carter. And he said, Maggie, I hear you when you say that this is a 19th century aspirational sculpture, but the shackles are still there. They're still present as a reminder of how far this country hasn't come, how far it has come. And I'm interested in that. And I was like, okay, good, we're going to do an exhibition. And I really have been inspired to do a lot of shows that foreground a historical object, but really put the platform in the hands of contemporary artists. So we put together this exhibition of context, 19th century context and earlier precedents for the Freedman Thomas Ball's problematic monument to emancipation that was paid for, but not, there was no input from freed people who paid for the sculpture, but they didn't have a chance to have a say-so in how it was organized. Recruitment posters, the story of the Massachusetts 54th, and that was kind of the beginning of the show. It's not, okay. But in doing some research on the Freedmen, I found out this amazing story of our particular cast's provenance, which is that it belonged to visionary, luminary civil rights activist Zelma Watson George. And Dr. George was the first woman to receive a PhD from the University of Chicago in music. She recorded and analyzed more than 12,000 traditional songs. And she was friends with Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, many of the leading artists of the day. She collected gullah baskets, African masks, imagery of hands, and she owned the Freedmen, and her family says that she kept it on her piano. So imagine all these people coming to visit her in Ohio. I should say she also served the Eisenhower administration, was a delegate to the UN, gave many, many talks on her connection to African art. And so I was never able, I looked through her papers, I was never able to figure out how she got the sculpture. I thought for a while that she might have been a descendant of the Massachusetts 54th. That didn't pan out. But I know that she kept it on the piano, and so I imagine now the key in a very different way from the way I originally imagined it. And we had a young intern from Williams College work on the project, and our director, Andrew Walker, is a scholar of John C. Fremont, and he pointed me to this painting, and we found a letter from, this is a painting, a portrait of John C. Fremont, the military emancipator who was responsible for emancipation before the Emancipation Proclamation, for which he was court-martialed. And Jessie, his wife, and John C. Fremont were staunch abolitionists. And you see this letter, it's kind of hard to read, but there's a kind of a sideways note from Jessie Fremont to John Quincy Adams Ward saying, I have this metal, this iron from Fort Wagner, whether that's melted down guns or shackles, I don't know. But I'm sending this Fort Wagner iron to you to use sparingly, for I treasure it, and I'd like to keep some aside to make an inkwell. And so she commissioned a copy of the Freedman that includes melted down materials from Fort Wagner, which was the site of the Battle of the Massachusetts 54th. And the Fremonts lived in Ohio, which is where Zelma Watson George lived. So all signs are pointing to our copy because of the inscription on the shackle that says the Massachusetts 54th. I think Ward is giving us a sign that that shackle is made from metal from Fort Wagner. So stay tuned for technical analysis of all the Freedman sculptures, but I'm pretty sure our copy belonged to John C. Fremont, and then Zelma Watson George bought it at auction. So that's the story of the provenance. That's a long way of saying sometimes you end up doing research that you had no idea you'd be doing when you start organizing an exhibition. But the real stars of the show are the 7 living artists we selected, Marita and Horace and I selected, to speak to issues of emancipation, liberation, or lack thereof in the 21st century. And everybody always wants to know how we selected the artists. It's a varied methodology. Some of the artists were artists with whom I've worked before. Hugh Hayden, who is originally from Texas and now lives in New York City, and Letitia, our hometown hero in Fort Worth, where my particular selections was alongside Sadie Barnette and Maya Freelon, and then Alfred Conteh, Jeffrey Meris, and Sable Elyse Smith were selected by Horace and by Marita. And this is really the notion of artists who are early to mid-career, whose work inherently addresses the issues that we wanted to get at. And the only prompt that we gave the artists was, speak to what emancipation, liberation, or lack thereof means to you in the 21st century. And some artists took that very literally and wanted to know a lot of information about the freedmen and John Quincy Adams Ward, and others went in their own direction. And so that leads me to Letitia, who you see live here, but in a beautiful photograph, headshot that we have here. Letitia was, I think, probably the first artist that both of us, all of us selected, and we're excited to work with her based on work with and surrounding and about freedmen's towns throughout the United States. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Letitia.
Thank you, Maggie. I appreciate it. And thanks for everyone who's here today and for this opportunity to talk about the work. I'm truly honored not only to be in this talk, but to have been included in this exhibition that I feel is such a wonderful look at where we've come since emancipation in a very artistic and creative way. All the different voices, the other artists that are in the show, it's really phenomenal. So I encourage you, if you are in the area, to try to get by and see it, because it's a beautiful show, and the way that Maggie's installed it at the Amon Carter is quite spectacular. So this is a view of the space where my work is when you walk into the exhibition. And this project that you're seeing here is a body of work called A Tale of Two Greenwoods. And you can see Hugh's sculpture of the freedman, his version of the freedman there in the center that he did with a 3D printer. It's phenomenal. And then I have another group of images, and Maggie, I think you have images of the show. So this is another panning there. But so I'll start with this. Yeah. So there's 2 bodies of work that are in this exhibition. One section is a snippet of a larger grouping that's at the Tally Dunn Gallery right now. But this first body of work is called A Tale of Two Greenwoods. And what I was thinking about for this exhibition was, and I wrote some notes while she was talking because it touched on some things I wanted to say. She talked about breaking, and she talked about shackles. She mentioned shackles. And I was thinking about how I have been obsessed with freedmen's towns for some time. And for most of the freedmen's towns, when I go to visit them, there's not much there. Other than, let's say, in the Greenwood district in Tulsa and this other project that I'll talk about in a second. But there's a very strong shift between those communities, in that the Tulsa community is dealing with a lot of generational trauma. And this other community, Africatown, seems more empowered. So when she was talking about the freedmen and how it could be perceived in different ways, like who has control over those shackles, and is there a sense of autonomy with the key, or self-freeing and breaking those bounds and being able to do that. I see that with the communities that I'm going to talk about today, because Africatown feels more on the positive side after emancipation, even though there's still shackles there. It has a more of a like self-preservation to that community than you see with Greenwood. So I was asked to create a piece to commemorate the bombings and the Tulsa race massacre that happened. And I went there fully expecting to engage with the individuals who were descendants of the community. And what I found was, like I mentioned just a minute ago, a great deal of generational trauma. And so for me, I wanted to shift gears. I didn't want to contribute to that. That was right around the time that, Trump was going to go and do a rally there. And it put the Greenwood story kind of on the national news. And they got a lot of press and attention. And the community was feeling like the flavor of the month, but nobody really wanted to invest in them. And so there was a lot of hurt and pain that they were being taken advantage of. That's how they felt. So I did not want to push and try to continue to do a project focusing on the individuals and their pain. And when I was doing my research, I found that the name Greenwood came about because a lot of the original founding members of the community migrated from Greenwood, Mississippi, and they just brought the name Greenwood with them. Well, my father was born and raised in Greenwood, Mississippi. Thank you, Maggie. And he was an Army officer, and I was born in Augsburg, Germany. And I have a lot of memories going back visiting Greenwood, Mississippi. And I went to school in Oklahoma, but I lived on the other side of the state. So Tulsa was not my stomping ground. I was in Lawton near the base and went to OU in Norman. But I felt like I had this strong connection because a lot of my high school and early college years were spent in Oklahoma. And I decided that what I would do for this project was to make it a little bit more personal and do this sort of comparison between the two Greenwoods. And that's how I got the title, A Tale of Two Greenwoods. So what you're looking at is embroidery hoops, and my work is photographs printed onto cotton fabric and then framed in these, they're about 27 inches on the long side embroidery hoops. And so I took images that my father had sent to my grandmother when we were overseas, and they were those old Polaroid-like land pictures, and he would write these messages on the back. So I scanned the back and digitally superimposed it over to the front of the image and printed that out. So you have his handwriting. That's me. I'm about a week old when he's holding me there. And then paired with that, there's one street in Tulsa, very near the Greenwood district. It's not in it, but it's like a few blocks off, where you have a whole city block with the stairs leading to what should be residential homes, and there's nothing there. So for me, it was a very poetic representation of what had happened to Tulsa in 1921, where they had completely annihilated a whole community, leaving just one city block. So as we go through the images, there are images of Greenwood on the left and Tulsa on the right. And I went back to Greenwood. I drove to Louisiana, picked my mom up, and drove up to Greenwood, Mississippi. And she was able to take me to the exact street that my dad was born and raised on. By the time I was born, my grandmother and grandfather had moved into a brick house. So I never visited this particular house, but my mom knew it from visiting when they were in college. And aesthetically wonderful for me, all the houses in that block were painted the same color. So as we go through these houses, you have, the Greenwood on the left and Tulsa on the right, and this one with the little mirror leaning up against it on the right side of your screen is the house that my father actually lived in. And then you can go to the next one. And so you have this visual joining of two city blocks, two different Greenwoods. And at the end is this picture that my dad sent to my grandmother. And I love the connection between this one and the image from Tulsa, because my dad is writing to my grandmother. My sister has been born, and he's saying Letitia likes to keep a hand on the job. She kisses the baby a lot, and sometimes her cheek has a little red spot. And there was this beautiful piece of red fabric that just happened to be in the Tulsa side, so it paired up nicely with that other image. But that's the Greenwood project that's at Amon Carter. The other project is called Bitterwater Sweet. And this project, I started still thinking about the landscape, had every intention for it to be just that, a landscape project about Africatown, which is a community started by the descendants and slaves and their descendants, that the slaves were brought over as captives on a ship called the Clotilda. And the Clotilda has been called the last slave ship. Technically, I don't think it's the last slave ship, but it's the one we have from that time period. After it was illegal to bring slaves across the ocean, they started smuggling them. And the majority of movement happened up rivers. And so there was this whole system of moving slaves up and down rivers in the States. Well, there was a family in Mobile, Alabama named Myers, and the gentleman who over the head of the family was a shipbuilder, and he bet someone $1,000 that he could still import slaves and not get caught. So he built this ship called the Clotilda, and it's kind of like a Viking ship in that it can cross the ocean, but then also maneuver up rivers. And he sent a ship's captain. They went over to Dahomey. They brought back 110 slaves. And as they were coming into the bay, they took down the ocean-going sails and outfitted it to look like a fishing ship, like a fisherman's vessel. And they came into the bay and up near, just north of the bay, up a river to a section called 12 Mile Island, got the slaves off. I believe the slaves were left in the landscape for about 2 weeks. They set the ship on fire, and they divided the slaves amongst 3 families, which he kept some of them for himself. That happened about 5 years before emancipation. So these slaves were set free not too long after having been captive and sold. So when they were set free, they migrated to a piece of land and were able to build their own community, which is called Africatown. And they were, some of their descendants still live there. So it's a really interesting case in that most African Americans don't know who their original ancestors were that came over on a slave ship. But these individuals not only know, they have pictures of their ancestors, they have stories, they have some recordings because of the attention that was drawn to them. So when I started this project, I was actually interested in the ship, which is at this location right here. This is still attached to the land where the Myers live. They actually have a cabin that's just down the river a little bit that faces this spot, but the government is currently studying the ship, trying to see if it can survive being brought up. And the community, the descendants, would very much like to have a museum in Africa Town where it can be housed. And if you go to the next image, this is a scan of the river bottom, and at the right, you see kind of a smaller vessel. That's the Clotilda, and to the left of it is a steamship. Apparently, this section of river is riddled with all different kinds of ships. You can go to the next one. So the pieces that are at the Amon Carter are those two pieces that we just saw, and then a grouping of images that I made of one gentleman who came over on the ship and his direct descendants. So this is Charlie Lewis, and the images I have are sourced images, just repurposed and changed for my style of work. And then if you go to the next. And then on the left is Joycelyn, who is one of Charlie Lewis's direct descendants, and her sister and her children. All of these images are about 6 feet high. Now the ancestor piece is smaller. It's an actual embroidery hoop, so I think it's about 27 inches. But the other pieces are about 6x4 photographs printed onto cotton fabric and framed. Initially, I wasn't going to work with the descendants, but the way that came about is I reached out to a gentleman named, well, I started searching on the ship, and I found images of a diver and tracked him down and sent him an email that very much sounded like the introduction they gave me at the beginning of this talk, trying very hard to impress him. I'm Texas Artist of the Year, and I've been doing this work for a while, and blah, 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 blah. And it worked. And he shot my email up to a gentleman named James Delgado, who was the vice president of Search. And this is the organization that was studying the ship at the time. And I had a lovely call with him. I was telling him about what I wanted to do. And really, I was trying to get access to the ship through him. And he said, well, you can't just do the ship. You've got to tell the story with the people too. And maybe I've gotten a little comfortable because I didn't want to step on anybody's toes when I was in Tulsa, and I assumed it was going to be the same reaction at the next town. But he put me in contact with them, and Joycelyn on the left was my major contact while I was working there, and it was a totally different experience. It was much more positive. They see their story as the story of all African Americans, even though I'm not genetically connected to that area. It really felt being there with them as if I was learning my own history all over again. And I think the difference is with the Tulsa community, they were completely devastated after having built up what was such a prosperous town. You know, it was called Black Wall Street at one point. And then with this community, they were started by Africans who had not been enslaved very long, who kept their tradition and their culture and was able to pass that down. Now, they had to keep it secret for a long time. They couldn't talk about certain things, but they still had it. They still knew about what their homeland was. And I think that's the difference between those two communities. And I love that I got to talk about both of those during this exhibition. So this is also descendants, Charlie Lewis, the sister with her baby and her daughter. And I'll let Maggie talk about this part.
Thank you so much. And if you haven't yet watched the documentary on Netflix, The Descendant, I highly recommend it. It's by Margaret Brown, who was a filmmaker who also went down to Africa Town. And I just fell in love with Miss Joycelyn through the documentary. And she and Letitia are meeting for the first time this Saturday at the Amon Carter, and that'll be on YouTube a few weeks after the talk. So I'm looking forward to that. This is and this talk that we're doing on June 10th with some of the other artists, and then Letitia and Margaret, is really partially a commemoration of Juneteenth. So the date at which people in Texas discovered that the Emancipation Proclamation had been in effect for a while. And this is the mother of Juneteenth, Miss Opal Lee. And my dream for the show was Miss Opal would come to the exhibition, and she called me up and she said, Maggie, I want to see the show. She's starting her own museum, the Juneteenth Museum in Fort Worth, the National Juneteenth Museum. And here you see a historical timeline where we gave context for the works in the show. 36 points of civil rights history from before Civil War to the present day, and Miss Opal is pointing at her own picture where she walked from Fort Worth to Washington, D.C. To make Juneteenth a national holiday. So this will be, I think this is the first year that Juneteenth is a national holiday, or maybe it's the second year. And that's Miss Opal's doing. And so she's pointing to her picture with Joe Biden signing Juneteenth into law, the Juneteenth holiday into law. So this has been a really awesome collaboration. She has brought lots of her friends. I basically get a phone call from the front desk at the Amon Carter saying, Miss Opal's here for you. And it takes us about 45 minutes to get from the front of the museum upstairs. It's a museum that's smaller in square footage than PAFA, I think. And so here, and that's because everybody stops Miss Opal for an autograph or a picture. And here you see a school group. And this is the best picture that's ever been taken in the Amon Carter. This is a young man who was told to smile, and he's so excited to see Miss Opal that his smile is a 1,000-watt smile. So I just love that the show is reaching audiences of Fort Worth, and that Miss Opal is an advocate for it. So please do support the National Juneteenth Museum as it develops, and keep an eye out for all the programming that we're bringing to Fort Worth. I will also say it is well worth a visit to Fort Worth, not just for the Amon Carter, but to visit the work that Cedric and Letitia are doing at Kinfolk House, which was Cedric's Big Mama's house, that has become a really vibrant community arts center. The show is traveling to Tulane next. Closes here on July 9th, Tulane, and then the Williams College Museum of Art, my alma mater, and where Horace was at the beginning, and then the Telfair in Savannah, Georgia. So if you can't see it at any of those places, there's also an online version. And because Anna did it, we also have a book published by University of California Press with the same title as the exhibition. And so, Lori, if there are questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you. Thank you. This is exciting. Everything, yeah, this is very exciting. I don't have any questions right now, but I'm sure there are people who do, and feel free to unmute yourself or add it in the chat.
I'll get us started since we're waiting for some questions, which I'm sure people have. I guess I'll ask Maggie you a question as a curator. Like, what changed most for you from the beginning of this project, thinking about it, to now? How's your worldview or your view of being a curator or the object, or how's it changed through working with all these great artists and working on this show?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in some ways, I'm a real optimist. I've always been a real optimist about the role museums can have in our communities. And in many ways, you know, Miss Opal bringing all her friends, the school groups loving the show, people seeing themselves reflected on the walls of the Amon Carter, maybe for the first time in a long time. That's been incredibly fulfilling. But by the same token, I see how resistant museums are to shifting the dialogue, and particularly in Texas. You know, I didn't think I was making a very rebellious move by making a historical timeline with just facts about when the amendments were and when, you know, the Black Panther Party was founded. And, you know, everything is a kind of a statement. And I wasn't really predicting, I live in a kind of cool museum going bubble in Fort Worth, and I wasn't quite expecting that we were doing something completely subversive. I thought we were doing something that was obvious, but it's still not obvious here in Texas and in many other places in the country. And really this was, despite the amount of talking I'm doing right now, this was increasingly I've seen my role as just a conductor of an orchestra, and everybody else are the musicians, and it's about what they want to say, and you know, really supporting artists and creating new work and bringing creativity into the world. So I find that I've reached a point in my career where I just step back and connect people, and magic happens in that connection.
I want to first ask Tanya's question because it's related to your answer, Maggie. Then I want to go back to Letitia's question. What were some of your models, inspirations for this exhibition in terms of connecting the art history to slavery, to contemporary art? Can you talk more about the value of that critical strategy today?
I think, yeah, Tanya, I think part of that has to do with what I just mentioned, which is sometimes the museum professionals making a statement about limitations of a historical treasure in the collection, or that has a political perspective. If the curators try to do it, it's less effective than putting that burden, but also opportunity onto the voices of contemporary people. And I, you know, as a museum that historically hasn't had work from past 1964, I'm acutely aware that our audiences might come to the museum with not an understanding of history. And so there's not that automatic connection to Ward's work. So it's really a way of celebrating Ward's work as, in a way, timeless. I mean, we have the John Quincy Adams Ward sculpture on the billboards around town. And our PR department was saying, you know, but we don't want people to think it's a historical show. And I said, I challenge you to think that as someone is driving by, people will automatically assume that's a 19th century sculpture. I don't think that's the case. And I was just getting a new car, and the person from the dealership was like, oh, you have that contemporary art show with that contemporary sculpture on the billboards. And I was like, actually, that's from 1863. So I think that's part of it. But I really, every exhibition I've done here has some sort of contemporary component, and it's really about meeting our audiences where they are, and bringing historical works to life by that juxtaposition, that there's relevance in today's society to the issues that were addressed by the 19th century artists.
Thank you. I want to now direct this question to Letitia. Could you please expand the role of the embroidery loop in your two works, and perhaps the tradition of embroidery in your art practice overall?
Yes. Embroidery hoops for me are very symbolic of when a woman makes something precious for her home. It's not, you know, they don't usually get out an embroidery hoop when they're making a dish towel or, you know, some sort of functional thing. And I'm sure all of us have some little thing our great grandmother made and she hand embroidered, and it just gets passed down through the generations. So they're usually thinking about something precious. And I love the juxtaposition of, let's say with the Greenwood Project, those images of lack of home or destruction framed in this device that's used to make something precious, and the way they're sort of put together does remind me of those like bipolar photo frames that would have like grandma and grandpa sitting up on the mantle, or some grandkids graduation pictures. You know, it to me at least, it immediately takes my mind to things about building home and the things we put in a home. And then also with the embroidery, and I didn't talk about this during the talk, those larger pieces of the descendants have text embroidered in the bottom of them in red threads. So all those large pieces that are at the Amon Carter say seed of Charlie Lewis embroidered in the bottom of them. And as I mentioned, the rest of the works for that show is at a gallery space right now, but it's in red thread. I'm a person of faith, and I was thinking about the importance of red in the Bible and what that says to us, and all those sections in the Bible that people skip over that say, and such was the seed of, and they beget such and such and such and such. You know, you just kind of skip that part, right? But I felt it was important to somehow lace them to their ancestors in that way. And it's small, it's not overbearing or anything, but it's there. So that's what I'm thinking about with the embroidery and the hoops, the use of the hoops.
One of those unexpected situations that emerged from the show, or commonalities in the vastly different media amongst the artists, but commonalities of subject matter. And one of them is ancestry and relationships to your family and fathers. So Sadie Barnette's and Letitia's works and Sable Elyse Smith's works all hinge on that. But another is the African-American quilting tradition that came up as a recurring theme in Maya Freelon's work and in Letitia's work. So nobody met until the opening. So that was really interesting.
Carol asked about the choice for the silhouettes for your images, Letitia. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, I've been using silhouettes for a while, and I was thinking about, you know, there's this whole debate about photography and fine art, and like, this, is it really art, blah, 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 right? And I have been trying to create works, like photographs as individual pieces that are on par with an old master's painting, the same kind of breadth and space and power. And thinking about those old cameos, as my grandmother collected brooches, and after she passed, I got all of her jewelry and kept it, and some really, really beautiful pieces, and thinking about all of that. But when I first started doing the silhouettes, it was shortly after my father had passed. And as I mentioned, he was from Greenwood and is a large cotton producer. And I was trying to find a way to capture an image of someone embedded in the cotton, like just as a part of the cotton. And I started taking just like white bed sheets out into the landscape. And I would put my husband and the kids kind of behind it and see how the sunlight was causing their image to be cast on the sheet. And so literally some of the first images, you could see the landscape around the sheet, and the sheet was hanging like just thrown over a tree branch or something. And for me, it was a way to tie in that, when you think about cotton and you look at me, it's that African-American history, you know, anytime I bring up cotton or cotton field or something, your mind automatically goes to a certain place. So to be able to embed their image and have it be a part or a pattern in that sheet was my connection to a cultural history and an ancestry. And then I really loved that you couldn't see them unless the light was casting their image. So for me, it had a very spiritual thing to it. And if you were able to see the works in person, they almost feel like they glow a little bit. Like I've had people think that there's a light installed behind them just because of the way the camera captures the image. And depending on how old the sheet is, you can get a little bit of the person through the sheet because of how worn it is when I take the image. So it just has this this thing about it that reminds me of the importance of like an old master's painting. I am influenced by Kara Walker too. Like I looked at her work a lot when I was in graduate school. I don't know if I could pull off some of the subject in the way she does. I don't know if I have the personality for it, but I was really impressed with how you could take this simple form of a figure and give so much power to a piece. And so I think I was really looking to do something along those lines.
That's incredible. Thank you. Since the exhibit, have you been able to track how the impact of the exhibit has been on the local community in Fort Worth? Have social justice movements drawn on the exhibit?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I don't know that we're that good at record keeping until the exhibition, or summarizing things until the exhibition is over. But anecdotally, I can talk about the groups that have come for tours and the people and the things that I have heard. We did tour the whole board of the Juneteenth Museum and sat down and talked about the Amon Carter's collection and what we could be doing better and what we have collected in the past couple of years. There are two other museums. One is a African American History and Culture museum opening up in Fort Worth, as well as a conversion of a former Klan hall into a center for restorative justice. And so those groups have come, and really actually the most spectacular tour that I had was with a young artist friend of mine who volunteers at an organization called Big Thought in Dallas. It's basically 12 to 17-year-old kids who believe in the power of art to engage in activism. And they came, and that tour was probably one of the highlights of my career, because I didn't have to explain. Normally, I talk about the history, but I also talk about what each artist is getting at. A lot of times that's to a white audience. And in this circumstance, I could just ask questions of, what do you think Letitia is saying here, or Hugh is saying here? And it was every bit a part of all these youth's lived experience, and to understand a little bit more about the positive aspects of the Black Panther Party through Sadie Barnette's work. They had been studying that and activism, different types of activism. So, I mean, anecdotally, I'm seeing a major shift in who is in our galleries, but also the challenge and the real benefit of engaging our mostly white docent class with some things that they hadn't thought about, and also local artists really feeling seen and heard and desirous of working with us. So I would say those are the anecdotal pieces of evidence I've seen. Whether it's a long-term shift for the Carter, let's hope. But I'm not, we haven't seen that evidence yet. We really do care that as broad a segment of our population, Fort Worth, comes to visit the Carter for everything, not just obviously putting on shows on the subject of emancipation and expecting that to be the only engagement that we have. We have also a program of community engagement specialists, so we're aware that there are a lot of barriers to coming to the museum. So our community engagement folks go out to community centers, work with some of the artists who are in the show and who are associated with us to do projects that are based on and connected to the exhibition. So that's really been wonderful.
That's great. I'm so glad you talked about the programs and audiences and possibly continuing to push people's narrative, like understandings of all these, of all the histories and the complexities.
Yeah, this show is kind of an inadvertent series of three. So we had Printing the Revolution from Sam, Smithsonian American Art Museum, who's probably our triplet in the American art dedication. So we had that show, and artists from the show did go out in the community and engage in activism, followed by Speaking with Light, which was 36 Indigenous photographers, contemporary photographers. And so this was the third show in that lineup. So you can see a real commitment to telling a more broad story of American art at the Carter.
Amazing. Well, we're actually at 1 o'clock, getting up to 1 o'clock. I want to thank everyone for coming today. This is truly amazing. Letitia, congratulations on being, is it Houston's best favorite artist? What is it?
It was last year, so I don't know how long we can keep
Yes,
it.
the whole state of Texas,
The
right?
whole state of Texas, and it's big.
No, I mean, that's amazing. Your work is incredible. And it's so nice to meet you, Maggie. I'm so in awe of the work you and Marita and Horace have done, and all the artists. So I just want to thank everybody for coming. Our next Art at Noon is June 28th. And we will be unpacking the archives from the William Way LGBTQ Center here in Philadelphia with Rami George. And so I'll send you a link to all the people who registered so you can know about it. And I hope to see you back in the Art at Noon space and at PAFA space and at the Amon Carter Museum. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Bye, friends.